Oh, good. Kyle's almost here. Gosh, it's so nice he's let me stay here. I do not want to be at my place tonight. I just moved into this building and... Do you want to hear something scary? So, I just moved into this building, this really old building from the 30s or something. I think that's why the rent is so cheap. And when I was signing the lease, the landlord, my landlord, this kind of tired guy, was like, "You don't stay up late, do you?" And I thought he was asking because it's mostly like adults or old timers in the building, and I thought he thought I was some young, loud hooligan or whatever, and I was like, sometimes I'm up late, but not really. And then he goes, "One more thing before you sign the lease. We have a rule in this building. You must be inside your apartment, door locked, by midnight." And I was like, okay, so there's a curfew, that's kind of weird. But then he goes, "Management is not responsible for what happens to you if you fail to follow the rule." Thought that was pretty weird, but with a price like that, I mean, I didn't really question it. I mean, honestly, I was just happy to finally have my own place. It was like the first time in my entire life that I felt free to be the me that I've always wanted to be. So I spent the first few days and nights building IKEA furniture and setting everything up. It wasn't until Kyle came back in town a couple days later that I even left the building. He wanted to go out and get girls, so we were out pretty late, like 2 or 3 in the morning. And when he dropped me off at my place, what my landlord had said about the late night curfew rule suddenly popped into my head. So I made sure to be quiet and to not disturb anyone. I entered the building slowly, climbed the staircase carefully, trying not to make the steps creak or squeak. There's no elevator in my building. There's just this rickety old staircase you have to climb to get to the second floor where my apartment is. When you reach the top of the stairs, there's a landing, and to the left, there's this long hallway, and my apartment is exactly halfway down the hall on the right. So I reached the top of the stairs, silently turned, and I started to head to my place, but then I stopped. All the way at the very end of the hallway, there was a man, a tall man, unusually tall, wearing a tattered coat of some kind. It was kind of hard to make out. Have you ever walked in on something that you weren't supposed to see? That's how I felt. There was something off about him, something not quite right. It was like he was too tall to be real, and just looking at him made the hair on my neck stand up, and I knew that something was wrong. So I slipped down the hall, but I kept my eyes on him, but he never moved. He just stood there, frozen, arms at his sides, staring forward like a tall mannequin. I made it to my apartment, and I locked the door behind me, and I went to bed. The next night, Kyle wanted to go out and get girls again, but I wasn't really into it. I mean, I went with him, but my mind was somewhere else. I couldn't get that creepy image of the tall man at the end of the hall out of my mind. When he dropped me off later, it was like 1 a.m., and when I got inside and I stood at the bottom of the stairs, suddenly I felt nervous. I was like, there's not going to be some tall man at the end of the hall. That was just some other old tenant who just happened to be out at the same time. So I climbed the stairs slowly, delicately, precisely, trying not to make any noise, reached the top of the stairs, held my breath, and turned. The tall man wasn't there at the end of the hall. He was closer. He was halfway between the end of the hallway and my front door, and this time I could see his face. And he had the strangest expression. He was smiling. A big, wide, toothy grin that made him look like he had about 1,000 teeth. And he had long, stringy hair, and his pointy head almost scraped the ceiling. This wasn't someone who lived in the building, and I had the feeling that whoever or whatever he was, he had been waiting for me. So we stared at each other for a few seconds, his eyes unblinking, and all I could think to myself was like, why is he looking at me like that? Like, what's he smiling about? I decided I had to get inside my apartment as quickly as possible, so I started to move, but right then, so did he. One of his skinny legs jerked to life, and then the other one, I just stood there stuck. I couldn't move, couldn't look away, and his blank eyes and frozen smile stayed locked on me as he began to strangely march towards me, getting closer and closer. And I snapped out of it, and I rushed down the hall, and I scrambled to get my key into the lock, and I practically leapt into my apartment, and I slammed the door shut behind me and locked it. I ran into my room, but I still didn't feel safe knowing that he was out there with that smile and those long legs. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept hearing my landlord's words. Management will not be responsible for what happens to you if you fail to follow the rule. The next night, Kyle wanted to go out again, but I refused. He insisted, but I caved in because this time I was going to follow my landlord's warning. When I told Kyle I had to be home by midnight, he started making fun of me and calling me Cinderella, but then he promised me he'd have me home on time. So we hung out for a bit, and it started to get later and later, 11:15, 11:20, and 11:30. I started to get really antsy. I was like, Kyle, please, can you just take me home now? And he rolled his eyes, but then he agreed to, so we got in the car, and suddenly, for some reason, there was so much traffic. And I pleaded with Kyle, I was like, can't you drive any faster? But we just had to wait it out, barely going 10 miles an hour. It wasn't until 11:58 that he rounded the corner to my street, and he hadn't even stopped the car all the way when I leapt out of it, and I burst into the building. I didn't even say goodbye. I was cutting it close, but it wasn't midnight quite yet. I still had time. I had my key out, ready, and my plan was just to run as fast as I could, straight into my apartment. And I flew to the bottom of the stairs, and I took the steps 2 at a time, barely even touching the ground, praying that it wasn't too late. And with my heart thudding in my ears, I turned to look down the hallway, and I reached the landing and gasped. He was there. Even closer than the night before. His tall, skinny head even taller. But this is fair, I thought. Like, I still had time. And I squeezed the key in my hand, and I looked at him. He was exactly halfway between where he'd been the previous night and my front door. With my key out, if I ran as fast as I could, maybe, just maybe, I could make it, but before I could even move, he burst into a sprint. His skinny arms and legs came shooting out towards me, and in a split-second decision, I decided to run too, faster and faster, as fast as I could, a race to see who could make it to my front door first. He was speeding towards me, unnaturally. His arms and legs, they were stretching, getting longer and longer somehow as they ran, his giant feet slapping the floor. I was almost to my apartment when I dropped my key into the ground. I scrambled to pick it up. My hands were too sweaty. I thought about turning around and running straight out of the building, but it was too late. He was too close, pumping his skinny limbs in a violent sprint, and I was on my hands and knees trying to pick the key off the carpet, and I finally got a hold of it, but just then he reached out his long hands towards me, his skinny fingers stretching, his smile getting wider and wider, his pointy head getting closer and closer, and right as I went to go put the key into the lock, Oh, Kyle's on his way. Oh, did I scare you? Oh, you look so terrified. I'll be right back. Kyle got another girl.